Oh, hey. Didn't see you there. Good morning. Welcome back to a little mug action. To a little cool mug action. So we've got some comments. We've got some comments to review. Meme Savant is saying that what do you think about Ernst Jünger? And I never read Ernst Jünger. That was past my time. Past my time. By the time I stopped reading books, I heard about Ernst Jünger, and I'm like, man, if I still read books, I'd totally read that guy. But didn't read Ernst Jünger. All I know is his Wikipedia. That's all I know. His concept of the anarch, I know his one-line description where it's like, the anarch is the person who needs authority. He needs authority in order to stand against as an individual. He cannot live outside of authority or without authority, because to live without authority, then he would not be in opposition to anything. Like if he lived alone on an island and he simply was himself, then he would not be the anarch, because he would not be against anything. But by having an authority above him, he is against this authority. He is the anarch. Archos, I think arche is the Greek, arche, probably relating to authority. Auctoritas is the Latin for authority. So perhaps arche relates to authority in some way. But this definition could, relate to a social democratic government. It could relate to a fascist government. It could relate to man against nature, any fundamental conflict. I think what Jünger is saying there is he's saying that I'm a man who desires opposition. I desire conflict. I desire war. I desire Valhalla. I desire endless struggle. This is why he writes positively, or he heroizes in certain ways the First World War, because he says this is a conflict which turns boys into men. This is a conflict, and we're fighting not for any kind of, and he wasn't interested in a greater German empire. He wasn't interested in German nationalism per se, but he was interested in the struggle of war itself and what that does to the individual and how that changes the mind of the individual and how that leads to a kind of transcendence and an individuality. And you can say the character building is maybe a more platitude-friendly way to say it. But I'm familiar a little bit with Ernst Jünger in his Wikipedia page. And, it sounds good to me. And we're talking about Waldgänger, the forest goer. Should we go into the woods? This question. Yeah, of course we should go in the woods. Yeah. My thesis is that there are powers, and you or I do not have the capability as individuals to engage with those powers. We don't have the ability to engage with them really very positively or negatively. They simply are. This is maybe a Lovecraftian worldview that there are these powers, they are above us. We can try to fight them in vain. We can try to become like them in vain. We weren't born into that position. Now, of course, fighting them in vain usually turns out worse than joining them in vain. To fight them in vain, at least materially, if we identify who are the gods, who are the powers. And Hector Quinn pushed back on me, and he said the Me Too movement affected the rich people. And transgenderism hurts rich people, doesn't hurt poor people. So he was pushing back on me, and here's what I would say. The ruler of our society is no particular individual. It's not George Soros. It is not Sheldon Adelson. It is not Mark Cuban. It is not Donald Trump. It is not Bill Gates. It is not Mark Zuckerberg. There is no single individual who controls our society. We do not live in, and Hector described how, Robespierre in the French Revolution There was all this purging going on. Stalin had the purge. Hitler purged the Sturmabteilung. So he's pointing out these instances in history where you have some kind of dictatorial, autocratic, hierarchical society, and Stalinism was a form of hierarchy with Stalin at the top, Robespierre at the top of the revolutionary movement. And he's pointing out how these individuals had purges to protect themselves. Capitalism and liberalism might also have purges. You could say the Me Too movement is a kind of a purge. And so it's not without its purges. But the idea therefore that it is weak, or that it is, he was sort of saying the reason why these rulers had these purges is because they felt precarious, they felt vulnerable. And I agree with that, but capitalism and liberalism are less vulnerable. Capitalism and liberalism are not these shallow secular ideologies like Nazism, which was secular in many ways, in many respects, in the sense that it did not have a cohesive religious framework. Maybe it could have developed one. But even the SS, even Himmler, did not make a requirement that you be a Germanic pagan or that you worship, I forget what the name of the god that he came up. He said, our ancestors worshiped this god, which I don't know where he got that, probably like from the Arminians or the Theosophists, or I don't know. I don't even remember the name of the god because it's not mythologically sourced. It's a New Age, one of those Theosophist creations. But he didn't even require some kind of belief in that God. You didn't have to believe in Odin. You didn't have to believe in Christ. You didn't have to believe in any singular God. So there was no religious framework. It was just, don't be an atheist. Don't be an atheist. So ultimately, that is a form of secularism. That is a form of pluralism. There was no religious cohesion to Nazism. There was no religious cohesion besides, I guess, materialism. So clearly, communism was secular. The French Revolution was secular. So none of these movements that Hector is describing, none of them were religious. Liberalism is religious. I believe that liberalism is religious. I believe that it is not merely secular. I believe that liberalism has gone beyond some of these previous ideologies, and that it maintains a kind of outward secularity. But there is a deep religiousness about liberalism, and there is a hierarchy to liberalism in its religiousness, that there is an exoteric truth of liberalism that maybe is secular, but then you get esoterically, and there is a cohesion to it. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it's all very diverse at the top. But again, these other experiments, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the communists, maybe Stalin was secretly religious, or maybe Robespierre was secretly religious, or, maybe the Nazis really did have kind of some secret religion at the top. It doesn't seem like that. It seemed like Himmler went off on his own little experimentations, and Hitler disagreed with him, and Bormann disagreed, and Goering wasn't on board with Himmler, and it seems like there was a lot of internal division, and that they didn't have a common religious framework. But I think there is a common religious framework to liberalism, and I think it depends upon, capitalism. It depends upon human nature and human psychology and understanding. It's integrated a lot of, what we would call the New Age over time. Crowley, Aleister Crowley, do what thou wilt. This sort of these spiritual ideas, which we can't quite call Satanism, because Satanism is just an inversion of Christianity. They are not Satanists in some kind of comical respect. But I think there are certain cohesive ideas and different levels of integration into this. And there might be disagreement, there might be sectarian differences or whatever, but I think there is a lot there when you start looking into it, when you start looking into someone, I think, like John David Ebert, and you start looking at all the stuff that he puts out there, and I think there's a lot to look at in terms of, these people being integrated with like Silicon Valley types. So anyway, we were talking about Hector Quinn. Let's see if I could maybe pull up. Give me a second here. I gotta pull up some comments. Okay. Hector, where are you? I'm looking for you, Hector. I don't know what magic carpet refers to. Apparently, I don't have connections, so that's too bad. Hector was talking about Me Too. And I would say when Weinstein or Weiner, Anthony Weiner, gotta switch it up here. When Anthony Weiner was thrown to the wolves, it actually was a process, right? It wasn't like one day people stepped up and said, we hate Anthony Weiner. It was a process. Remember, he went through sex scandal after sex scandal after sex scandal. First, it was, I don't even remember what the first straw was. I think the first straw was like he was sexting, and then he was like, I went to sex therapy, now I'm back, everything's good again. And then the second scandal was like another sexting and a third sexting. And I think he had either stepped down and then he ran for re-election or a new election and stepped down. It just kept going on. And then finally he kind of got the boot and he was put in jail for some time. And I don't think he's doing anything very important now. But he's probably still engaged in some form of consulting, or he probably still has some kind of connections. Maybe he's a pizza maker now. I don't know what he does. I don't keep up with him. But clearly there's a process here. It's not just instantaneously like you're a rich, powerful elite and then they kick you off the boat for no arbitrary reason. There is a method to the madness. We might not understand it. It might not be clear to us. But I think there is something there. I think there are hints that there is something there with someone like Epstein, where he was first unveiled and then he was protected. He was protected for a long time and he was still integrated into the upper class to an extent. And then at some point, something happened. And we don't know what happened, just like we don't know what happened with the Las Vegas shooting. But just to assume that, like, oh, you know, the elite is really weak and fractured because, look, Weiner and Epstein are getting kicked out of the club. Well, that is not true. There are other instances, and I'm forgetting he plays the president on a certain show that I don't know the name of because I never watch it. But he's this guy who came out as gay and said his father was a Nazi and his father raped him, and that's why he was touching people inappropriately and sticking hands down people's pants and really just penetrating them digitally without their consent, doing some weird things. So he seems to be protected at this point. So there's various levels of protection. There's stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't exactly know. There are probably feuds within the system. We know that within the Nazi system, by the way, and I'm going to forget the names for you. I don't remember the names, but there was a general who, and we could do a little Google searching, but we can't do that right now. We could talk about this general who, I think he was chief of staff or some kind of position of the German army at the time. He was sort of in the top position in the German army, or one of the top positions. And he married this woman, he was like in his 60s. He was pretty old. And he married this woman who was like in her 20s. And I think Hitler was at the marriage. Goering was at the marriage ceremony. And then Himmler had, because he was chief of the SS had its own intelligence operation going on. They found out that this girl, through some digging, they found out this girl had taken nude photos. She had done some old-timey pornography. And so this became a scandal. And I think, what was his name? Von Bluther or something like this. Someone's going to remind me. Anyway, the general was kind of humiliated and kicked out of he was forced into retirement, essentially. And this was almost on the eve of World War II. This was not long before World War II broke out. So this was pretty, this is pretty significant. Maybe it was 1936, maybe it was 1938, I don't remember the exact dates. But these sort of things happened, right? So you'd have feuds within the Nazi party, and certain people would dig up dirt on other people, and they would use it to gain favor or to, persecute others and whatnot. And I'm pretty sure, as far as Ernst Röhm goes, chief of the SA, Sturmabteilung, that all of the information about him being gay didn't come from communists who were trying to dig up info on him. I mean, maybe it at some point they were also looking into that. But it seems a likely story to me that there were opponents within the Nazi Party who didn't like him, who were digging up this information on him as sort of opposition research within the party. So this is all to say that, I don't know why things suddenly went dark. Maybe I'm low. Anyway, you can have a party, you can have an ideology, you can have a movement, you can have a spirit, you can have something where there's infighting and where people are thrown to the wolves and where there's opposition research within the thing. So that's kind of how I'm looking at an Anthony Weiner. That's how I'm looking at a Harvey Weinstein, as this is not indicative of, the elite is falling apart and they're vulnerable and weak and confused and they're eating their own and it's cannibalism. It's not how I'm looking at it. I'm looking at this happens in every power structure, right? And it doesn't mean that the power structure is about to fall apart. When we look at the ancient worship of gods like Zeus and Jupiter and Christ, these worship movements lasted for 1,000 years or more. So I think liberalism has the potential to last 1,000 years or more. You can't kill Christ. You can't kill Thor, Odin, Zeus. But the belief in these things has lasting power. So there's a belief that we have in liberalism, and it has the potential for lasting power. I think the most disruptive thing here is going to be technology. I think technology is going to be disruptive for the promulgation of the faith of liberalism. I think technology has the potential to create huge, vast differences between people in a way that we haven't seen before, that makes liberalism outmoded. Liberalism is a means of control. Liberalism is a means, it's a fairy tale, in the same way that an atheist would look at Christianity and say Christianity is meant to control the people and make them like sheep to the slaughter and make them okay with their enslavement. It's a slave morality or this or that. Well, liberalism is that even more so. And so if at some point this task of controlling people, well, at some point, is that even going to be worth your time? If people are so inferior to technologically augmented humans or genetically augmented, whatever, then there will be no need for the populace at large. And you could see something like a wide-scale population collapse, even in places like Africa. Think about it. African Americans are 75% genetically African on average. Some of them are less so African. They're more so European. Some of them are more so, or well, not more so African than African, but some more than 75%. So there is a color spectrum. There is a gradient among African Americans. But African Americans have below replacement fertility. And so the idea that Africans are somehow like genetically, deterministically fertile is just not true. African genetics are not somehow some kind of like animalistic, I don't know the caricature that people make of Africans, but they are not somehow like, they're like metaphysically determined to be fecund. That's just not true. And what is the process by which Africa could be reduced to below replacement fertility? I think it could possibly happen within a few generations. I think it could happen faster than we think. So, when you look at the West and you look at the conception, you look at the ways that birth rates have changed, Germany in 1945 was still celebrating, a cult of motherhood and having many children. And then just a few decades later, the birth rate collapses and continues to collapse to the point where we are today. So this is in the span of less than 70 years. So the idea that Africa in 70 years could not also experience some kind of collapse, which would be accelerated, the cultural change would have to be accelerated, maybe chemically, by introducing soy into the African diet, by introducing pesticides into the African diet, because a lot of Africans eat organic food. To be honest, they're eating organic. So to introduce a lot of soy, a lot of pesticides, chemical warfare essentially, as well as cultural warfare, as well as technology. Get the African boys and girls hooked on TikTok, and which is not complicated. Anyone can do a TikTok. 5-year-olds can do a TikTok. So get them engaged with that kind of culture. Secularize them, atheize them, get them on pornography. Chemically castrate them to an extent, to a degree. There's a lot of means of attack, as well as just contraception, making condoms essentially free, with Western NGOs making birth control free. Israel already does this. When they have African immigrants come into their country, they inject the Africans with birth control. That is multi-year birth control. So they essentially sterilize them, for up to 5 years or something. So these kind of things you could introduce this kind of thing to the African continent, where Western NGOs are just mass sterilizing people. And this could happen very quickly. So the idea that I don't know, that Africa is like a bulwark against this, I don't think is really legitimate. And Africa, I guess, would be the worst obstacle. If you were looking to depopulate the planet, you'd be like, well, Africa's got all this population growth, but I don't think that's a huge obstacle. I think you could really collapse the Earth's population in the next 100 years in a way that we haven't quite seen before. So you could do that. So I think that's the threat to liberalism, is technology. I think technology could really end this religion of liberalism. But I think so long as technology doesn't disrupt things, and different people are more optimistic or pessimistic about whether technology can continue to grow and develop at the current rate. So if you're pessimistic about technological growth, I think liberalism is here to stay. If you're optimistic about it, I think that's really threatening to liberalism as a mimetic strain. The survival of liberalism is threatened. And we're talking about that, and we're honest about that. In terms of what should we do? Should we go in the woods? We should just be honest. We should be honest, and we should be truthful. I did listen to the video on Twitter of the father of James Young speaking with James Young and asking him, do you think you're a girl? And what does mommy do to you? And all of these things. And you're listening to that, and it's sort of the thing where it's like, if you can imagine for a second being in that position, then going in the woods and leaving things behind and not caring doesn't seem like much of an option. Not that what is the alternative, right? Well, I don't know really what the alternative is. But when you're in the thick of it like that, then just ignoring it all and walking away from everything doesn't seem like an option. Whereas if you don't have kids and you really have nothing to lose by just walking away, then that is an option. You can just walk away. So, that's kind of dependent on where you are in your life. If you're sort of invested in this world and people depend on you, and the future generations are counting on you to fight for them, then that's a very different situation than if you're just a guy, walking around. If you're just walking around, then why not just walk out, just walk out and do your own thing and don't worry about the rest of it. So there's different approaches for different people, I guess. And it doesn't have to be antagonistic, but I do think that people need to just be honest with themselves. I think you need to be honest with yourself in the way that if you think you're gonna do something, if you think you're gonna change something, and you are not only willing to make sacrifices for yourself, but especially these propagandists, these people who these quote unquote leaders, these people who say, hey, join me, join me, join me. If you join me, you're going to save Western civilization. If you join me, you're going to save America. If you join me and you sacrifice to me and you donate to me, then you're going to save the white race. If you join me and you sacrifice for me and you donate money to me, then all these good things are going to happen. And again, looking realistically at the picture, there are two outcomes just generally, is that liberalism continues for quite a while. It's only just getting started. Or there's some kind of technological disruption that, frankly, unless you are a really smart, sciencey guy, computer science guy, you're not going to have any outcome. You're not going to have any influence on the outcome of whether we have some kind of technological breakthrough or not. You know, unless you're a top geneticist or something, you're really not going to do much either way to change the technological situation. You're not going to be Ted Kaczynski-ism fails. You can't fight technology, and unless you're very smart and integrated with, the latest literature and the latest developments, you're not going to help technology. So you're basically neutral either way. So there's nothing, you're not actually going to really change. You're not either going to push us toward liberalism, away from liberalism, toward technology, away from technology. This would be like from the Greek perspective. And I was just listening to a guy sing the Iliad for 37 minutes. But you're not really going to, it's like you're not going to push Achilles, or not Achilles is not a good example, but you're not going to push Hera or Zeus or Apollo. You're not going to push these gods toward or away from their goals. Unless you're an exceptional person, like unless you're a really hot chick, maybe Zeus is going to come impregnate you. Maybe if you're Hercules, then you can kind of get on Hera's nerves or something. Unless you're a demigod, you're not going to influence the gods. And when I speak of the gods, I'm not speaking of Harvey Weinstein. I'm not speaking of Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not speaking of Anthony Weiner. I'm speaking of a spirit of capitalism, a spirit of liberalism, which is above these individuals. If George Soros dies, liberalism does not end. If any individual billionaire dies, it is not the individuals who matter. It is the network that holds them together, this ideological, spiritual, religious network, this idea. So that is what is important. And, again, I think we should just be honest. And if you say, well, being honest is going to hurt our chances because being honest is fatalistic and being honest is not the right strategy for victory. Well, again, that's just, it seems like people are making some really bad choices. I don't recommend these bad choices. I can't endorse that. What I can endorse is being honest and looking at the world and saying, this is what it is, and we cannot change the exteriority of the world, but we can change our interiority. We can change what's inside of us. And if you believe that fighting for a specific cause is going to change your interior, if you think that fighting for a cause is a spiritual quest, then by all means engage with that. I'm not necessarily trying to put a wet blanket on people engaging in something spiritual. But if you're doing something, if you're saying things like the ends justify the means, like if only we can get 10,000 TikTok viewers, then we can finally red pill the Zoomers for American nationalism. I know it seems cringe right now, and I know it seems like a waste of time right now, and I know it seems like we're only promoting the Trump movement, which is a pro-immigration movement, which is a pro-trans movement, which is a pro-gay movement. That's what the Trump movement is, which is, all of these things. If we just support the Trump movement now, maybe we can get Tucker Carlson. If we just support Tucker Carlson now, then maybe we can get, whoever comes, maybe we can get Barron Trump, So there are all these kinds of fantasies that just seem dishonest. They're just not honest. And so I don't see any kind of hope in them. If you're not being honest about your situation and what's going on, then there's no hope, because you look back at 2016 and people who were memeing about Donald Trump, and it was all lies. It was all lies. And people really wasted their time, lost jobs, got beat up in the streets, beat up other people in the streets, and went to jail. Some real severe consequences. So I don't advocate, losing your life and making sacrifices over people who are liars, people who are deceivers, people who are not going to change anything, people who offer false hope, false promises, don't follow through. What I say is that if you look at the world and you say, yes, I can't change the world, but I can determine how I respond to the world. The conditions that we're living in, whether you call it Lovecraftian or Nietzschean or even Christian. I mean, the Christian perspective is that really Satan is the prince of this world. Really, Satan can give you a lot of things. He promises Christ all sorts of territory and power if Christ simply bows to him. But Christ rejects that because he says, well, I mean, I could get all those material things, but then it wouldn't matter because I would lose the love of my Father. And that really, at the end of the day, is the spiritual treasure that is more important than all of these material things. So if you have this perspective, then it's like, yeah, you can fight for something, but don't fight for something under false pretenses. Don't fight for something with the idea of, okay, if we just re-elect Donald Trump, something's going to happen. Or if we can just start a civil war, something's going to happen. A civil war is going to lead to Francoism. It's going to lead to ultra-Trump, mega-Trump. Maybe Matt Heimbach will become president. And we know what that is. We know it's a deception. We know it is one thing in the streets and another thing in the sheets. So we know what that is. And we can't be fooled anymore. We can't be fooled once we open our eyes to what is going on and the nature of things. At that point, we are no longer fighting under false pretenses. If we choose to fight, it is purely for our own soul. It is purely for spiritual purposes, not for the purpose of going out and fighting for something out there in the ether, in the world, in an election, in a civil war. You really don't believe that if we had a civil war that nothing would change? Of course things would change on the exterior. Yes, we would have President Trump, we would have President Heimbach, we would have President Franco, and we would have a fascist government, or we would have like Otto von Bismarck. And we know what Otto von Bismarck did. We know who his friends were. We know who Ferdinand Lassalle was. We know who the bankers were for Otto von Bismarck. We know what he did to Germany. We know about the 1848 revolution. We know about the Franco-Prussian War. We know about these things. So when you're going to bring in some strong man who's going to advocate and promise you all of these things, and he's going to be the right-wing victor in a civil war because he's going to have the support of the populace who are going to say, oh, this guy's more wild and crazy than anything we heard before. He's against gay people and he's a Christian and blah, blah, blah. And then he gets in and you know what's happening behind the scenes. And all that happens is he consolidates power. He destroys the opposition. There is a new monoparty. Now, instead of being called a liberal monoparty, it's a fascist monoparty. And all of the same stuff is still going on in the background. And then he dies, and then there's some kind of back to business as usual with a liberal democracy. That is the time-tested process that happens again and again, not just in Spain, but in Chile and in Greece and in all of these places. Even you could describe the collapse of the Soviet Union in some ways as following this script, that it happens again and again and again. And this is the thing they're trying to do with China. We'll see if China buys into it. But, China at the end of the day is also extremely mercantile and connected in with the same forces of capitalism and mercantilism. So, there is no escape from this. There is, this is the situation. And how did this situation come into play? Did you in some way choose to be born into this world? That is an interesting question. And for what purpose? For what purpose did you want to confront this world? For what purpose did you want to encounter this world and experience this world? That's an interesting question. Maybe we should think about that. We should think about what we're supposed to be doing. Is this world a problem which is meant to be solved? Is this like a puzzle? Is this a video game? Or is there something deeper going on? Is there something that we need to understand about the nature of reality? I know I've been associated with those German philosophers, Schopenhauer, and on a personal level, I think that pessimism just appeals to me in a lot of ways. And so maybe I'm too extreme in that direction. But at the end of the day, I think this perspective bears repeating. Because every time I say it, someone somewhere says, oh, but isn't this a chance? Isn't Hungary a chance? Isn't Russia a chance? Isn't China a chance? Isn't Poland a chance? Isn't Trump a chance? Or isn't it better than nothing? Or isn't it better than the alternative? I don't advocate for accelerationism in the sense that I think technological accelerationism could destroy liberalism. I do believe that. But in terms of cultural accelerationism, voting for Elizabeth Warren, I don't think is going to wake people up and result in fascism. And again, even if we do have fascism, it might only last for 12 years or a couple of decades, and then it's back to business as usual. So understanding this long term, I think, is important because what I see happening to a number of people is they become obsessed with Donald Trump or a particular propagandist or white nationalism or something, and they pour all their money and resources into this. And I think your treasure, your life energy, your blood is better poured into things of a higher nature than these superficial politics. People who have literally donated hundreds of thousands of dollars collectively to white nationalism, I think would have been better served to pour that money into forming local spiritual, religious organizations, academic organizations. There is so much that could have been done to fuel elite research, high culture, high art. That to me would be more valuable than funding all of these plane tickets and conferences and, again, hundreds of thousands of dollars poured into white nationalism. Totally worthless, totally lost, totally hasn't pushed the conversation forward or, again, altered our reality. And that instead people could have poured into religious institutions, fraternal organizations, not just street fighting organizations, not just alcoholic organizations. Again, not superficial organizations, but hierarchical organizations, not populist organizations, but organizations that would be stratified. And that would, there's a different strategy that you could approach here, which I've called the minoritarian strategy. So that is something that I advocate. And so I do, I guess, promote like an extreme kind of pessimism and an extreme kind of dissociation and an extreme kind of, throwing a wet blanket on everyone's little hopes and dreams. But I think that is sort of a necessary antithesis to the thesis of right-wing politics. I think you do need that kind of antithesis. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there is some kind of synthesis. Maybe the synthesis is what I'm saying here is a minoritarian strategy. Maybe the synthesis is, okay, well, we're going to be very careful with our action. We're going to be very intentional. We're going to think long-term, not short-term. These kinds of things, we're not going to be populists. We're going to be elitists. We're not going to be a mob on the street. We're going to be pyramidal. We're going to be hierarchical. We're going to be academic. We're not going to be about, we're not going to be about this low level, low hanging fruit, winning hearts and minds and that sort of thing, putting up flyers and that sort of thing. But it's going to be a deep investigation. It's going to be getting to a deep level. I think that would be more effective. I think when you look at world movements that win and succeed, frankly, when I look at Judaism, I don't see an evangelical movement in itself. Now, Jewish people do evangelize. They don't evangelize Judaism per se, but they do evangelize certain things. They evangelize, the notion of democracy and pluralism and multiculturalism, and then feminism and multiracialism and mass immigration. And they do evangelize certain things, but they don't evangelize Judaism itself. And that's very interesting as a strategy. Of course, the Jews are not the only people on the planet, and there are many other people with many other strategies, but I think that's a good one to take a look at how it's worked historically and how it works in the present day. To look at that and to understand it and to say, maybe that is a better structure. Now, maybe you disagree with the metaphysics there, maybe you disagree with the message, maybe you disagree with the particularities and the class association, the mercantilism. But I think you always have to get back to that. Yeah, these are important. These are important things to harp on. And I keep saying this, and I guess people keep having a reaction. But I don't know if the conversation is moving forward. I don't know if we're getting anywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start talking to some people. And what I'm going to do is respecting their privacy. I'm not going to record them, but I'm going to record myself. Because it seems people still have questions. It seems people are still curious. It seems people still want answers and takes. So I'm going to probably put together some essentially monologues that will be me trying to engage with other people. And we'll see what comes out of that. I think that's all for this one. Thanks for listening. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.